And here we go. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're just giving people a few more minutes to jump in and then we'll go ahead and get started. All right. I'm going to let people jump in for another minute. If you would like, I encourage you to grab a pen and paper or something to write with today, even if it's your computer or your notes in your phone. That way you can kind of jump in on some of these guided skills we'll be going through. All right. So without further ado, let's jump in here. Thank you all for coming. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. If anyone can just give me a thumbs up if you can see what I have going on over here. Awesome. Great. Okay. Well, thank you all for coming today and Happy New Year. Um, we're so excited to have you. My name is Dr. Shannon Walsh, and unfortunately, my colleague and good friend who helped kind of create this workshop, Dr. Chloe Bromberg, she's feeling a little under the weather, so she might jump in, but we're going to go on ahead and hopefully she'll come back at a later time. But in the meantime, this is what we all signed up for, which is cultivating change and planting the seeds to a life worth living. So this is a workshop potentially in a series of other workshops where we can really just go through skills on how to really build the change that we want to be seeing in our lives, which is very exciting. All right, so just to give you a little bit of a rundown of what we're going to be doing today, I'll talk a little bit about who we are, who I am, and kind of the type of therapy we practice. And then we'll do a little bit of mindfulness and I'll explain what that means. Of course, many of us have come today because maybe our resolutions and behavior change hasn't worked so well in the past, or maybe we found some pitfalls. So we're going to talk about why resolutions may not work the way we've been doing them. And then we'll teach you some new skills by choosing values with an acronym we call PLANT, making goals with an acronym that we call SEED, and then troubleshooting to figure out how to make the sustained changes that you want to see in your life. At the end, what I'll do is I'll give you guys some resources and we'll follow up with any questions or concerns you guys might have. Just so you know from the beginning, you will be getting copies of these slides, worksheets, and this is going to be recorded. So don't feel like you're missing anything. We'll give all that information towards the end because I know there could be a lot of information in here. All right, so like I said, I'm Dr. Shannon Walsh. I made this workshop with Dr. Chloe Bromberg. We are clinical psychologists at Mindwell NYC, which is a group private practice in New York City. And really what we focus in on is evidence-based practice. So we're looking at different skills and interventions that we believe could work for all kinds of people. The presentation today is really for the general public, right? So we have professionals here, friends, family, maybe people affiliated with Mindwell. And so I really look at what we're doing today as both like something that you can take into your profession, but also, and I do it as well, like how do I apply these things personally? Because I think all of us can use skills on how to understand our values, right? And really build goals that feel effective for us. So if I haven't muted you guys already, well, I'll ask to stay on mute throughout the presentation You can unmute at the end when we do questions, but I will open up the chat feature. I might ask you guys some questions along the way. And so feel free to jump into the chat, answer some questions. Participation is completely optional. You can have your cameras on or off. You can jump in the chat, whatever you'd prefer. But like I said, we'll answer some questions towards the end. All right. So we always like to start our workshops and webinars with what we call mindfulness. And I'm not going to go into it too far today, but what I will say mindfulness means is like, how do we stay in the present moment with intention and being aware of the judgments we might have that come our way? And the reason I think this is really important for today is because we're talking about resolutions, right? Future values and goals. And sometimes, and definitely this happens to me too, where my mind is so focused on the future and what's happening ahead of me, or I'm thinking about the past and what's happened already, and maybe the pitfalls I've seen or situations that, weren't as successful. And I lose sight of what's happening in the present moment. So I almost think it's helpful today to just kind of find that present moment to start our workshop today. And I'll tell you what's happening right now, right? So what's happening right now, if you can jump in and practice, is anything that is happening with your five senses. So take a very quick look around your room, and I want you to just notice anything that you see, maybe something that you haven't seen before. Then I want you to listen to sound. So just take a listen to my voice right now, help that kind of ground you and bring you into starting this workshop today. Anything that you taste, anything that you might smell, maybe it's a candle nearby, your evening tea, whatever that might be. And then just think about what your body feels like right now, like the clothes on your body, the seat behind your back, if your feet are on the floor. That is what's happening in this present moment. That's the only thing happening outside of you right now. The other thing happening right now is what's happening inside. So you can even take a moment right now and just get a sense of, like, what am I feeling? Do I have any tension? Before you start today, do you want to take a breath and release that tension? Do I have any thoughts? Anytime during this workshop, if you notice your mind kind of wandering to either things that we're talking about or what I'm having for dinner after this, you can always bring it back to your five senses or how you're feeling in this moment to kind of come back to us. And I'll talk a little bit more about mindfulness later in our workshop. All right, well, why don't we go ahead and get started here? So I think in order to figure out new ways to channel resolutions is to figure out what we already know and, of course, what doesn't work, which is why I think many of us are here. All right, so I'm going to ask a question. You can think about it. I'd love to hear it in the chat, but here we go. How many times do people make the same resolution? What do you think? How many times do we make the same exact resolution? You can type it into the chat in the right corner. Think about it.
Chat isn't available.
Oh, there we go. Thank you. All right, you can jump on in. All right, we got a guess here. Some guesses going on. Loving all of these guesses. And I will say our first guess, Elizabeth, you got it. It's 10 times, right? So think about that, right? That it takes 10 times that people make the same resolution before we quit, right? And so it's so interesting to think about it that way, that we keep on going back to the same ideas over and over again, even though they didn't work, right? And what I think is interesting about that is it actually defies the laws of psychology, right? Because what we know about behavior is we're going to do more things that have successful outcomes. Like if there's something that we want, we like, that's comfortable, rewarding, we're going to do more of it. And if there's something that we don't like, we're going to do less of it. So why is it that we keep on coming back to the same things over and over, even if we weren't successful? And actually what research has found is it's the idea of hope. We as humans love hope. right? The hope that like next 2024, 2025, like I'm going to do all of these things, right? And it's such a beautiful and wonderful thing to have hope. But at the same time, sometimes our hope isn't realistic or sometimes it's not effective. So we want to be really mindful with hope because I think hope can be a really awesome motivator. At the same time, sometimes it has some consequences because we set ourselves up for maybe like unrealistic expectations or we don't meet ourselves where we're at. So we'll talk about how to balance hope a little bit today. But I think that's really where we're getting stuck. And we're also getting stuck in these four things. Okay. Roadblocks to our typical New Year's resolutions, right? Speed. I'm going to run a marathon. I'm going to run the New York Marathon. And I've never run a mile, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to be running 5 miles next month, right? We think we're going to do it so quickly, right? That's that hope piece. So we really put a sense of an amount of time, a quick amount of time related to our resolutions. And sometimes that's why it doesn't work. Sometimes it's ease, right? Has anyone, right, gone into a new year being like, oh, it's going to be so easy to drink a bunch of water, even though I only have one glass a day right now, right? It's just going to be easy. It's just going to come naturally because I'm going to get that New Year's flow. It's not always that easy. And once we realize it's not that easy, that might be a time where we usually quit. Sometimes it's amount, right? So the resolution that you choose is really high, right? There's a lot of it. So it's like, I want to be running 26 miles, right? Not just five, right? We want a large amount. I want to be doing this for a long time for anyone that does like health goals, like changing really big health goals. And when we feel like we don't hit the amount that we set our mind to, it's easy to pull out and say, maybe next year, maybe next week. And then finally, we use the term consequences for behavior, but all that means is outcome, right? Consequences doesn't have a negative connotation to us. Sometimes what makes resolutions not work is we believe the outcome is going to be this really big, exciting thing. Once I run that marathon, I'm going to be running marathons all the time, right? I'm going to be a triathlon runner, and then I'm actually going to pick up this hobby and this hobby. It's going to completely change my life. And so we set these really exciting big outcomes. And then when we notice that we're not moving as close to it as we want to, we'll pull out. So many of us, including me, has definitely fallen into some of these gaps, which is what has made our resolutions not work in the past. And what we're going to talk about today is a little bit of acceptance and change, right? So we really come from this background of training in something called dialectical behavior therapy. I'll mention it a few times, but it's called DBT. And Marshall Linehan, who created the treatment, emphasizes this dialectic, right? These two things of acceptance and change that have to work together, that can exist at the same time. And that's really how we start building a life worth living. All right. So now that I've kind of started off on a low note and told you why things aren't working, I want to actually get into the purpose of today's workshop, which is how to actually think of values, goals, resolutions in a really different way. Maybe these are things that you've heard before. Maybe these are new tools in your toolkit. Okay. So let's do some gardening, right? My grandmother loves gardening, and I'm thinking about, this work as a way of planting seeds for long-term change, right? I think another part of where we get stuck in resolutions is they feel very fixed, right? They feel very outcome focused. And so once you get there, you're kind of done. At the same time, at least when I think about why I start resolutions in the first place, is because I want sustained change in my life. I want change that's going to be ongoing. And so we're going to talk about that difference right here. Opening for the chat, right? What do we think is the difference between a value and a goal? That. Mm, we got some good options. priorities, measure. Yeah, values being continuous, consistent. All right, these are some great ideas. Um, People are really thinking about the difference here. And this difference is really important, right? So, this is what I'll say. And maybe these pictures here can give you a little bit of a clue. Oh, some good ones coming in. Love it. All right. So, values are like a direction that you want your life to be going into in the way that we're going to see it today. So, when I think about values, I think about a compass, right? Going west. I can start going west, and then I keep going, and then I keep going, and I never get there. There's no point where I'm like, made it west, right? Because it's something that I can't reach, but I'm always aspiring to go. On the other hand, goals are more like checkpoints, mile markers on the way to that value, right? When I think about a goal, it's something we can check off a list. It's fixed, right? You can say, yes, I graduated high school. Yes, I got that job I wanted. I, you know, got to that goal that I've been working on towards a really long time. And you can mark it off and say it's done. And I'll show you an example of how I think these two things can relate, right? Here you go. So, say my value in life is being adventurous. I want to be more adventurous. There's no end to that. There's no point in my life where I'm going to say 100% I got too adventurous. It's something I can always be continuing to move towards, right? And it can change and adapt in different ways. However, like the idea of going west, right? A goal could be like getting to California, like, oh, checked it off, I'm on my way, right? So, goals for being adventurous could be something like planning a trip. I can check that off of a list and say, you know what? I'm on my way to being more adventurous than I was yesterday. It could be taking a cooking class. That could be adventurous, right? Something new. Even exploring in your local town. Those are behaviors or actions that you can observe and say, you know what, I did these things and they were really in line with that direction of being more adventurous in my life. And my thought is thinking about it this way with values and steps towards your values might be more successful than thinking about resolution as something that's fixed and then they're done. All right. So let's dive in deeper into values and then we'll dive deeper into these steps or goals. All right, so how do we identify our values? What is this? So let's do some prompting questions first. Really what like values are what's important to you. And maybe there's not a lot of opportunities in your life to ask yourself just these questions. We don't talk about them a lot. So deep down, take a moment, just think for yourself, what is important to you? And what pops into your head? Hmm. Yeah, some people are walking in the chat. That's great. Health. Another way to think about it is like, what do you stand for in your life? Or what do you want to stand up for? Hmm. Good stuff. Yeah. What sort of qualities do you want to cultivate as a person? Right. So these are really your values, the things that are important to you. And again, going back to that idea of DBT, the goal of that treatment is building a life worth living. And really, what I think Marsha Linehan meant by that was that in life, a life worth living is going to have a lot of things. It's going to have joy and excitement and comfort and all of those really great things. And it's also going to be messy and it's also going to be hard and painful and uncomfortable at times and stressful. But if we can really identify what's important to us, it's going to make that stress worth it. It's going to make it worth it to do the hard things because we have a really sense of like, this is important. This is how we want to be. Well, let's practice together. So you guys are starting to think about it. I'm going to give you a little more opportunity by giving you some prompts. We're going to do some real values identification here. I'm going to give you 2 prompts. Okay, so the first thing I want you to do is think about these scenarios. Say you have a big event coming up in your life. Say it is a wedding, your wedding, and someone's going to say a speech about you. Say it's your retirement party and your boss is going to talk about you, or your 80th birthday and your family is going to talk about you. How do you want them to describe you? What qualities do you want them to mention? Do you want to say, yeah, like Shannon, she was really fun and really hardworking, right? What are those qualities that you're thinking about? For some of us, I think those thinking about those milestones can be really challenging. So understandably so, right? Especially if life is a struggle right now, right? And thinking that far in advance can cause us some discomfort. So I'm going to have you think about it a different way that might be helpful. Think about somebody that you admire. They could be a celebrity, they could be somebody that you know, they can be living or dead, right? But just think about somebody you can picture that you really look up to and admire. And what do you admire about them? What qualities do they have that you're like, that's important? That's something I aspire to be, right? So you have these two ideas, right? The idea of the big event, and you have the idea of, if you're thinking about somebody that you admire. And I keep asking you how to describe them, but I'm going to give you some options here. I'm going to give you lots of options here. Um, if you can't read this, don't worry. I'm sending you the slides after this workshop so you can look back. But here's some ideas. Like maybe you're thinking about what my value is, how I'd want to be described. And take a look at this list. There's a bunch of options. You could also say something off of this list. Do I want to be described as someone that's like has a good sense of well-being, is really patient, career oriented, maybe? Or the person that I'm picturing is really like just proud of themselves and confident. But here's the piece where we're really going to build on our skills, because I want you for today to pick one. Just for the sake of the practice, some of you already have. If you would like, you can look at this list. If anyone wants to put theirs in the chat, you can put your value in the chat now. But we're going to hone in on one of these values for today. If it's hard to pick one, that's okay. Maybe you can just pick one to practice. And I actually have a resource at the end of this presentation that can help you actually pick your values in a creative and fun way. Okay. See them building. Yeah, we have authenticity, generous, loyalty. Yeah. Balance. Awesome. All right. So even if you did not put one in the chat, what I'm going to ask you to do is write one down, because this is going to bring us through. Right. Okay. Okay. Now, keep yours in mind. And I have a few more points about values before we continue, which is values are for you, right? In this case, they're not meant to be what society wants you to do, what your parents want you to do, what your partner expects you to do. Values are for you. It's what's important to you internally. And the reason I want to emphasize that is because when we get to those places where we're going to start actually thinking about steps and what's gotten in the way of those resolutions, sometimes it's because it really wasn't that important to us. It was what we were expected to do. So values are for you. Values change. I like to say that because my values always change depending on what's happening in my life. So don't feel like what you pick today is stagnant. My values today are not the same values I even had a year ago, because my life circumstances have changed. Time has changed, right? And so it's okay if they change. Thank you, Sarah. I'll talk about this one a little bit more later, but values can conflict. And I'll talk about how we can navigate that. What if you value leisure and hard work? You might say, I can't do both. And I will say, yes, you can. Because there could be a ways to effectively find steps towards being hardworking and there are steps towards having that leisure, having that relaxation. Um, Sometimes they feel like they can conflict, and we just have to think about creative and effective ways to have both. I mentioned from the beginning, values are continuous, right? They're a direction, they can't be completed. And then finally, values are action oriented. So a life worth living isn't just going to happen to you. As much as I really wish and want it to, um, I wish that for myself, right? You have to act in a ways to build it. Um, I once read this really interesting study that actually said that one of the emotions that actually we're not born with is happiness, right? We're born with anxiety and anger and shame and frustration. Those develop naturally, right? They're in our bodies. Happiness actually has to be built because we don't need it to survive. It's extra. So I think about that in this case, right? Where it's like we have to build with our values. We have to act. All right. So I hope you all wrote down your value because we're about to dive in now that we're all ready and we know what our values are. This has a lot of words on it. If anyone has ever heard of DBT, they know that we love acronyms. And really, I just think about acronyms as a way to like remember things a little bit easier. So I made these steps that can actually help us think about our values and make sure we're picking something that we really want and we're thinking about it effectively. And I'll walk you through it. All right, so the acronym is PLANT. And you already did step one because you picked a value, you identified one. The next thing I want you to do is think about labeling it. So, what I mean is that define it. And this actually, I think, came up because sometimes we say these really great words. All of the words on that values list was really, they're great. Responsibility, right? Adventure. But what does it mean? What does it mean to you? Right? When you think of health, are you talking today about physical health, emotional health, mental health? Sometimes I actually use the dictionary for this step because I'm actually like, I never actually defined the word. I think I know what something like responsible or creative means, but I actually haven't defined it. And I think actually once we have a definition, it helps us get more concrete of what we're asking for. And so you're going to pick your value. In this case, I chose adventurous, right? And then you're going to define it. So what I think about adventurous, it's unusual and exciting, right? It's something different. And I get that feeling of excitement from it. It's okay if you can't come up with a definition yet, but it's something to keep in the back of your brain. All right, the next thing I want you to do is assess it with A, right? So, why'd you pick this one? This goes back to what I mentioned about um, are the values for you? Because if you're like, oh, I picked my values, but it's actually not that, I don't know why it's important to me, then it's something to think about, right? We really want to find one that's important to you. And I'm curious as to why. Like, why do you pick balance? Why do you pick authenticity? In this case, for me, adventure, when I do something adventurous, I always feel this pride and this joy, and I want more of that in my life. And that's why I chose it. So you really want to think about why you pick it. The next step is really important. And I think sometimes we really forget it because, like I said, all these words, these values sound really great, but I envision it. Like, what would my life look like if I was more adventurous in general? What would I be doing differently? Like, if Shannon was more adventurous, would I be booking more trips? Would I be going to new shops? This is one that comes up for me a lot because I like to say that I'm adventurous. But if somebody asks me to go to a restaurant and try kind of food that I've never had, I'm like nervous. I'm like, I don't know. I don't know if I want to do it. That's adventurous for me. Right. So maybe if I was adventurous, if I was more adventurous, I would say yes to that. But take a moment and really just think about that piece. Imagine your life or imagine somebody who has the value that you want and just think about what they're doing differently, what you would do differently. What does it look like to be kinder? What does it look like to have more balance, to have more health? And once you actually start painting that picture, you start making it more real, it's going to be that much easier to actually start thinking about steps, right? Of what steps am I going to take in accordance with my values? Because now you have an image in your head, you have things you can do. So then that next step is really going to be our next acronym, which I'll talk about in a few minutes on how to build the steps that go with our value. We're planting our seeds. Okay. So before we actually leave the values portion of this workshop, I want to actually remind you of one thing that is so important. And it's the idea of if you can tolerate both of these things, right? So we're talking about values, we're talking about the reason we have resolutions is because they're really great things. And I think sometimes where we all get very stuck, including myself, is we stay so much on the hope side that we don't also acknowledge the hard parts of change, of doing different things in accordance with our values. So with value comes pain. With things that you care about comes more risk, potentially more discomfort, because in our bodies, change is naturally uncomfortable. Your body wants to stay the same, right? To make change, there's going to be some stress. It's natural. And before you even go into your actions, what I just want to remind you of is if you're picking a value, we also need to accept that there might be moments of discomfort. There could be moments where you feel guilt, like, I didn't do that thing I wanted to do. And that's okay. If you could stick with it, if you can hold both, that's going to help you get towards the changes that you want to see in your life. All right. So, with that in mind, let's go towards these changes. Let's make some steps here. Planting the seeds are action steps. Okay, so we've seen this picture before, right? Before we were really talking about we talked about goals before, and I'm going to change the word to steps because I think steps goes more in a direction, right? They mean the same thing in this case. How do we know we're getting closer to our values? It's exactly the steps that we were imagining. Right. So the first thing we did, we picked a value. The second thing we're going to do is think about the steps towards this value. So I'll go with a example here and then we'll talk about it. If I value creativity, a great step towards this value is learning guitar. That would definitely make me more creative. And here's where we might get stuck, right? Why resolutions haven't worked sometimes is because we have this great goal. We have this great step we want to take. I want to run that marathon, but I'm not a marathon runner. I don't even run a mile at this point in my life, right? And so we might need to break it down into smaller steps. What are things that I can do to be more creative, maybe even to move me towards being able to play that guitar? Anyone here listen to music, right? Listening to music for inspiration. That's creative. We can see that as creative. I'm using that creative part of my brain to absorb some art. That is a step towards my values. It might not be playing the guitar yet, but I'm moving in the direction for sure. Maybe I need to go on Google. Like before I play the guitar, I don't have a guitar. So I might actually have to Google where do I get a guitar? And if that's all I do today, if that's the only thing I get done, I can still say, you know what, I'm more creative than I was yesterday because I Googled it, I thought about it. That might be all I can do today, and that's okay. Then I might buy the guitar, and then I need to learn a chord, right? I'm not going to turn into Taylor Swift tomorrow, but I can start building those steps, right? All right, so these are important things to think about. I'm going to take it further. Bear with me because some of this information, there's a lot on the slides, but I think it's good to take home. All right, so Remember that value I told you to think about? I want you to bring it back in your head. I hope you wrote it down. All right, because now we are going to take our first steps with seed, right? We're planting the seed. I'm so pumped about this acronym. All right, so what seed is, we're going to brainstorm steps. We're going to evaluate mindfully. That word mindful is coming back. We're going to be effective. And then we're going to do it. We're going to do the steps. We're going to act. Okay. So, like I said, there's going to be words here, but bear with me. All right. So, breaking this down, the first two steps of seed. Everyone has their value. You can be thinking about that as I go on. Brainstorming steps. What I love about this is like brainstorming, you can really get creative. You don't want to evaluate here. There are so many different ways to be creative, right? It could be through art, it could be through music, writing, whatever you can want to think of. Anything that's really creating something new. It could be through engineering. For me, it's making PowerPoints. That's where my creativity really shines. So really brainstorm different ways or steps that you can be more in line with that value. The more options you have, the better. And even if you want to start thinking about breaking down those steps, you can do it here, right? So like, I'm not going to write a whole album, but I can start by buying the notebook, right? That's going to be in there of being creative. So you're going to brainstorm steps, right? We did that already in my example. You can even do it on your own page at home. If you had your value, you can even start brainstorming what are some things I can do that are in line with this value. This is the next step. Very important again, because I think we can get lost here. And it could be one of the reasons that resolutions may or may not have worked for you in the past. It's because we are setting ourselves up with resolutions for a version of ourselves that it just isn't here yet, which is okay, right? We want to set really mindful steps for where we are today. So this is what I need to consider, right? When I'm making these steps, I want to think about what does my life look like right now, right? What am I going to need for some of these steps? What are the facts here? Like for instance, if I want to learn guitar, do I need somebody else with me? Do I need them to teach me? Do I need money? Do I need time? Also think about like what you've already done. So in this example, right, the facts that we have is like, you know what? As much as I love this value, I really want to work on it. I also need to be mindful of the facts in my other areas of life. So I may have a lot of work to do this week. So of course I want to buy that guitar, play the guitar, but I'm also mindful of the projects, my other areas of life, or I need to prioritize my family. I might have to take a long drive today. So maybe going to the guitar shop isn't the step I need to take today, but there might be other things I can do. I just had COVID, so I'm run down, right? So that might be a fact to consider. I've never played guitar, also important one, right? So you want to think about the facts, and then you also want to think about how you feel, of course, or your emotions. Anyone that knows DBT, these are like the wise mind skills. Like I'm really excited for this. I love music. It's really motivating. That's where you tap back into that part of your brain that's like why this is important to you. And at the same time, there might be other emotions at play in your life. Like I have anxiety about a work presentation coming up, right? All of this is important to just kind of think about, right? When you're choosing your step, right? Because you want to choose a step that's going to meet you where you're at and then build from there. So rather than the way we look at resolution sometimes, which is like, I see the end and then I'm going to try to go there, I want you to start from the beginning and build up. Okay. So that's the first two steps, brainstorming and just think about where you are in life. Be mindful. Next is a favorite word that we use, which is effective. It's doing what works. So you're going to take, and like I said, I know there's a lot of words on here. I'll send these out to you. You're going to take what you were just mindful about, trying to notice where you are in your life, and you're going to work and problem solve with the version of you that's today, right? So you're going to choose maybe one of the steps, right? One of those brainstorming ideas, and you want to have backup. So, for instance, for me to do what works, I want to do something in line with my values today. What I thought I was going to do earlier in the day was I was going to go to the guitar shop, or I was going to look up different like guitar coaches, people to train me, teach me music. But my day changed, right? Because life happens and I have a lot of other things on my plate. And so I need to do what works. Like, do I need to set a reminder to give myself space in the day to think about my values? Do I need to like get a buddy to do it with me? Because I've tried this before by myself. And as much as I wish I could do it by myself, it just doesn't work. And I'd rather have something that just works. This is a fun one, but think of using your body chemistry. So, dopamine is a very fun neurochemical, right? And it's where we feel excited and rewarding. So, maybe if I want to drink water, right, I got to get a fun water bottle, or I want to like play a song that I love, right, and work towards that. So, sometimes you need to find something that makes it feel exciting that's going to help you do the step. So this is where you're effective. Think about problem solving, how you're going to do this today. And then you do it, right? And I say that in an exciting voice, but it's actually so much harder in life than we think. But there's something that we can do every day in accordance with our values. There's a way to be creative every day. There's a way to be authentic every day or healthy every day. Don't judge the step as big or small, because I think sometimes, like, if we're having a really rough day and we want to do a big step, we're going to be really disappointed versus doing what works and just finding a step that meets us, right? I may not be able to go to the gym today or run as much as I wanted to, but I can have a healthy dinner or have an extra glass of water. When we get stuck in the judgments, like, I'm so lazy, or if I don't do it the way I want to, I failed, that's going to pull us out. So what I want you to do is recognize that's going to happen and find a way to do it anyway. A version of it that works for you, right? We wrote here, if you don't take the steps you wanted to today, it doesn't mean you didn't get back to the beginning of the path, because you've already taken steps. And the reason we say that is, like, say you're going on a hike and you slip. It's not like you start right back at the beginning. You slipped and that sucked. But now you got to get back up and you still already made it this far on the hike, right? So we got to keep it moving. All right, so just to bring it home here, this is seed, right? These are all the steps you just did. Like I said, you're going to get to take them home with an example. You brainstorm your steps, you evaluated mindfully, you problem solved effectively for the version of you that's today, and then you do it. You pick something today. You can even do it after, even coming to this webinar, you got closer to your values because you're thinking about it. Right. All right, so that is seed. So now you have steps to identify your values, to identify steps, and actually start taking action. But I just wanted to put this out there because, as we all know, things get in the way. And I just want you to think and prepare for that and cope for that, right? Guilt and judgment might get in the way sometimes. So that could be the sense of, I didn't do the thing I wanted to do today. Boredom. Like, this is really boring. Like, maybe some of those beginning steps to where you want to be are really boring and it's hard to sit through. This one has come up for me. I'm thinking it can come up for other people. I don't want to right now. Like, I had all of these health goals and I just don't feel like it. That can get in the way. Sometimes others, like, what if you said, like, oh yeah, I was going to do that guitar class with my friend, or I was going to try that thing with my friend and they can't come. We got to cope for that. Sometimes the amount of time we have or other life stressors, right? So this is one of those things that we're practicing accepting. These are going to come our way and we can problem solve for that. That's that balance of hope from the beginning. You want to be hopeful, you want to be motivated. You can do these steps towards your values. And we also want to accept and acknowledge that it's not going to be easy all the time. So let's prepare. I'll put in the chat. I'm curious if anybody has other things that get in the way of doing those resolutions or values. And if you just want to even like call them out right now, you can put them in the chat. Mine's definitely that I don't want to sometimes. That happens with my water drinking resolution every single year. Um, Tired. Yeah, that's a huge one. That willfulness, getting really stuck. Yes. What society wants versus what's important to us. That can be in that others column for sure. Yes. Sleep. Fear is a big one. Yeah. That speed piece. Other commitments, right? Yeah. So you guys are doing a great job at identifying and calling out the things that get in the way. And I actually think that's so important, right? Because like we said, in the past, we would jump in and be like, oh, I want all these changes and I'm so excited. And then life hits and we sleep in and we're tired. So what do we do effectively that day that can even get us closer to that step or move us towards our values? All right, so let's summarize all of this up because we did a lot today. Um, and I hope that you took some new tools. Maybe these are things that you've learned before. Like I said, maybe this is just like a totally different way to think about behavior change, resolutions, values. Um, it's all on here. First, what we did is really considered what is a life worth living and what's important. And then we chose our values. We picked one. That's step one. We defined it. We said, what does this word even mean? We thought to ourselves why it's important to us specifically. You imagined a life where you were more like that, more like whatever that descriptor was. Yeah. You started to take action steps, right? And you did that by brainstorming what are some different steps I could take that are in line with my value? Where am I at right now? What are the facts I need to consider in my life today? And how am I feeling right now? Because that's totally going to influence what steps I'm taking and what this path looks like on our mountain as we're hiking. How to be effective, how to do what works, even if it's not what we want to do, even if it's not the way we want it to look, right? How do we move on that path, even when the path changes? That's effective. And then you do it. Then you do that step today. Avoid avoiding and be mindful of judgments. Okay. So that is the summary of our workshop. And I want to just point out some resources here that I think could be really helpful. Um, of course, we have some of the articles when we were talking about resolutions that we cite here, books of the types of treatments that really inspired and influenced this workshop. So really Marsha Linehan, DBT, the skills here, and then Russ Harris's acceptance and commitment therapy is really values-based. So you can have these resources. What I love about the top here is some different types of handouts and worksheets you can do. You can see that we're very action oriented here. You can get the DBT skills manuals and learn the worksheets, specifically the skill accumulating positives in the long term is what this workshop is influenced by. The happiness trap, Russ Harris, who is the creator and one of the founders the work within acceptance and commitment therapy, he has all the free resources online. So if you want worksheets on how to identify your values, what they look like, you can check that website out. And then I think I told you in the beginning, if it's hard to even identify a value, that link in the middle, that thing to perform, does something called a values card sort. So you can sign in online and it takes you on this interactive game to actually figure out gut instincts what your values are. So if you had trouble identifying one, you should definitely check that out. But then, of course, we're also resources. So here's my email and my professional Instagram account. You have Mindwell's information and our website. If you're curious about continuing this work, maybe more focused for you, Loie's information as well. But these are some resources for you. And I really hope you enjoy today's workshop. You can probably see that this is very in line with my values because of how much I'm passionate about this work. So after today, what I'll do is I'll send you a form. If you wouldn't mind giving some feedback, there's actually a chance we might do another webinar within the month. And so it'll ask you if you're interested in joining that. That will really be about what values you chose and staying accountable. And we'll also be sending you a lot of these resources. Jess, did I see a hand from you? Or oh,
Accident. I tried to send confetti.
oh, that's great. Thank you. But thank you all. So I'm going to stick around for the next few minutes for questions. You can feel free to hang if you have any questions, jump off. But I hope you all have a happy new year.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was wonderful.
Great.
Yeah,
Thank
you, Shannon.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Shannon.
Thank
Lots
you
to
so
think
much,
about.
Shannon.
Of course.
That felt good.
Ready?
Mhm.